Mark Harper, last time we spoke, here's what you said to me. Keir Starmer is not on course to win a majority. That's before an election campaign where Labour's lack of policy would come under scrutiny. Conservative Party under the Prime Minister's leadership is absolutely up for the fight. Well, of course, that was before the calling of the election. You don't have a crystal ball. You couldn't have seen the wet launch. You couldn't have foreseen the D-Day debacle. But are you still as confident as you were on the 5th of May?
Well, look, I'm still very much up for this fight, and we're fighting. The Conservative Party across the country, led by the Prime Minister, is fighting for every vote. It's also worth just saying, look, I've seen the polls just like everyone else, but it's worth saying, apart from a relatively small number of early postal voters, no one's voted in this election yet. Not a single seat's been decided. And one thing I've learned over the years is taking the British people for granted and telling everybody the election's over, I don't think is wise. But look, the polls do tell us one thing. They do show people that if people don't vote Conservative, and some of the parties, you know, some of the smaller people vote for the smaller parties, and Labour does end up with a very large majority, they're going to have a blank cheque. They are trying very hard in this campaign not to spell out how they're going to pay for any of their promises. We know there is a black hole. We can have a debate about how big it is. We've said it's going to be £2,000 for every family in the next over the Parliament. But there's definitely a black hole. We've set out the taxes that they might have to raise, and they haven't ruled them out. So there's a price tag coming. They should spell it out.
We'll talk about tax in a moment. But in that case, do you want to just clear up something? When your colleague Grant Shapps talks about a supermajority, what is he actually trying to do? Is he trying to scare the voters into voting Conservative, or is he announcing that you're no longer fighting to be the government but to be the principal opposition?
No, we're fighting for every vote, and we're fighting to win this election. But if you look at the whole conversation...
So you want to terrify people at the prospect of a Labour government?
No, look, the whole conversation here in this election has been dominated by the polls, right? Now, if you look at the polls are saying that Labour's going to win with a very large majority. And I think it's reasonable to point out to people that if that were the case, you know, if people thinking about voting Conservative vote Reform or they vote Liberal Democrat, and you end up with a very large majority, you're going to have a Labour government with a blank cheque, no one to oppose it, and we know there is a black hole. We know Labour is considering a range of taxes. They won't rule out things like council tax increases on people's homes. We know they're doing it in Wales, where there is a Labour government. So these aren't just things that I am...
We've heard a lot of this from Prime Minister. I get all of that. But let's be realistic. Do you actually genuinely believe that you can win this election?
Well, look, we're fighting for every vote, Trevor. Not as I said, apart from a small number of postal voters, no one's voted in this election yet. I know what the polls say, but it's about what people do when they're actually voting. The point of view and I being here this morning is to make an argument to give people that choice between lower taxes under us, higher taxes under the Labour Party.
Let's forget the polls for a moment and let's talk about what voters themselves say and think. And I'm going to show you what one of your own self-declared faithful supporters said to the Prime Minister at Sky News' debate this week.
I'm a former Conservative Party chair and a lifelong True Blue, but in this election I find myself an undecided voter. Actions taken by this government actually make me feel ashamed. How do you plan to rebuild the public trust in you, or is it already irreparable?
Now, that lady whose name was Amy, I think, what struck me about it is that she said that she just couldn't vote for the people who brought us Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, who continue, as far as she's concerned, to tarnish the Conservative brand. Prime Minister this morning's refused to criticise Liz Truss. Would you now acknowledge that the Truss and Johnson years were just a massive mistake for you?
Well, look, on Liz Truss, she clearly made mistakes on the economy. I mean, I spent the whole of the summer of 2022 making the argument for the Rishi Sunak's economic policy, and he was proved absolutely right. It's one of the reasons, I think, why people should listen to him now, the fact that we've got inflation under control, he's setting out the right economic course and warning of the risks of Labour's tax rises. He was right in 2022, and he's absolutely right now. But look, it is reasonable, picking up Amy's point...
And Johnson?
That, well, look, over the period we've had to deal with this Parliament, we have had thrown at us a global pandemic, and a war in Ukraine. Both of those had massive impacts on government spending and on the levels of borrowing and tax. We've now dealt with that, got the public finances in better shape, inflation down. That's why we're confident we can now grow the economy and continue to cut taxes.
I'm not just talking. I'm not talking about this just in order to torment you about, Liz Truss. The problem that you have, surely, is that the Johnson and Truss prime ministerships are very much in voters' minds, and when they think about the offer that you're making, this is what they're thinking about. And I'll show you something else. Here's what they say when they're asked who they blame for the problems that we face as a country. Now, and who they blame for the situation. And this is 2019 Conservative voters. Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, very much there, almost as much as Rishi Sunak. My point is, unless you, at some point during this campaign, repudiate the past, then people are judging not Rishi Sunak, but they're judging them.
Well, look, I think the thing I would do is what you've just spent there is some time looking at the past. Perfectly reasonable thing to do.
As most voters are doing.
But this election is not about the past. It's about the future.
Most voters are judging you on your record. That is the past.
Well, voters do two things at elections. They absolutely look at the record to judge how you performed in the past. I would pick up over the last 14 years our success on education, where we've actually got 90% of schools good or outstanding, and primary school children the best readers in the world. That's about how you deliver opportunity. I think it's a very strong record. I can do a list, but that's the one I would pick as my top one. But elections are about the future. They're about the offer in front of us, and our offer's being properly scrutinised, as you're doing this morning. And my argument is Labour should be scrutinised. There's a load of taxes coming if there's a Labour government.
But let me put you something.
But the point is, elections
specifically.
Trevor, elections are choices,
go back to something that you've
for the
actually
future.
just said. Let me go back to something. Voters do remember, and they judge you on what you've done. You said to me this morning that that you've brought down taxes. That's not true. You are prefiguring a tax burden of 37.1% in the next Parliament. Taxes are going up in this country.
No, Trevor, I didn't.
That's what people judge
Trevor,
you on.
I didn't say we'd cut taxes over that period. I said we were cutting taxes. We have just cut taxes.
I've just told you. You're pushing them up to 30. You're pushing them up to 37.1%. The whole burden. On personal taxes, you have, since 2010, raised the threshold. It is estimated by AJ Bell, the stockbrokers, and the IFS, that that's the equivalent of a 3.5% increase in the main rate of income tax. You have put personal taxes up.
No, hang on. Since 2010, we've over doubled the personal tax threshold. So we've reduced taxes for people over that period. And it's the case now, if you're someone at work, the personal tax rate that you face, the combination of the rate and the threshold, the rate you face is the lowest for 50 years with the two cuts we've made in national insurance. Now, if you look at the choice-facing
Unless you happen to be one of the 5 million people who have been dragged into higher rate tax pays, tax bans since then.
If you look at the future, under Labour, the tax burden will reach an all-time high. Pensioners will be paying tax on the basic state pension for the first time ever. That isn't going to happen under us. We've got a manifesto, fully costed, fully funded, that cuts people's taxes, cuts the taxes on working people. By contrast, the Labour Party is going to put them up. That's a very clear choice for people. And Labour won't rule out things like council tax revaluation, council tax band increases. And these aren't just things I'm making up. In Wales, where Labour's been in power for 25 years, they are literally legislating today, at the moment, to increase council taxes on people in Wales. It is very reasonable to say, if that's what they're doing in Wales, why won't they rule it out in England? And I think it's reasonable for us to warn the public about that. And I think the public will, when they consider it, will realise an ordinary working person can't afford a Labour government.
I'm happy to let you talk about what you promise and what your criticism, what Labour's promising and so on. But your problem, surely, is that you have been in government. It's not your fault, that's a job. And people will judge you on what you've done. Let's take another area. You inherited net migration at about 250,000 a year. You told, your party told the country at 2 elections that you'd bring it down to tens of thousands. You had the happy burden of being immigration minister for a while yourself. In fact, under Boris Johnson, the net figure rose, and it's now running at nearly 700,000. And you're talking tough again about a legal cap on immigration, which you could have posed any time in the last 14 years. I mean, the question I think that the voters are going to ask themselves are, you promised something, you didn't deliver, you talk tough, you didn't talk tough. Who are you really?
Well, I think you just look at what this Prime Minister, the person that's actually running for re-election, has done. Since he's been Prime Minister, he's made changes already to the migration rules so that over the coming year, the number will halve. He's accepted the number is too high. This is for legal migration. We've already seen, so before the election this year, a reduction of 1/4 in the number of visas granted. So this Prime Minister, who's the one that's standing for re-election, in terms of his actions that he can be judged on, has taken steps to reduce net migration. Now, that takes time to feed through, but he's already done that, and it's already starting to take effect. So I think if people judge him on what he has done and what he has set out, then I think they can be reassured that the direction of travel is going in the right direction.
There's just been one poll that put the Reform Party ahead of you, so let's not make too big a deal of it. But whereas a month ago such a poll would have seemed just fanciful, it now seems complete within the realms of possibility that they'll get more votes than you. When Nigel Farage taunted you that a vote for you is actually a vote for Labour, he got a case, hasn't he?
No, he doesn't. And that was one poll, and that's not what's been borne out in other polls. And look, I'd say very simply to those voters who are thinking about voting Reform that have voted Conservative, they want to see lower taxes, they want to see migration under control. If they vote Reform, they're going to get a Labour government with a large majority, and it's going to deliver the opposite of what they want. So look, I would just say to them, they need to think about what they vote for and what they're going to get. And if they vote Reform, they get a Labour government with a large majority doing the opposite of what they want. And that's what they need to think about when they cast their vote.
If Mr Farage wins his seat in Clacton, would you object to having him back in the Conservative Party, taking the Conservative whip?
Well, look, at the moment, I think every Conservative should focus on winning this election. And he's leading a political party that's campaigning against us and trying to stop people voting Conservative. I am focused. Every Conservative at this election should be focused on winning their own constituency and winning the election. That's what I'm focused on. I'm not going to spend time talking about what happens afterwards. I am in this to win the election,
hang on.
to win my seat and to win the campaign.
We can't pretend it doesn't matter, because for many voters who want a centre-right government, position of Reform and Nigel Farage is important. And the signal that the Conservative Party may bear its differences with Nigel Farage could be something that many voters are looking for, that actually the centre-right can be reunited. So let me ask you again, would you object to Nigel Farage rejoining the Conservative Party?
Look,
some of your colleagues have said they'd welcome him.
He is leading a political party which is trying to take votes away from the Conservatives. I think every Conservative supporter, all those people that voted for us in 2019 and want to reduce taxes, reduce migration, and to deliver all of the things we've said, higher defence spending, which is fully costed.
If I may say so, you're carefully not saying that you wouldn't have him back in the party.
No, I am carefully saying that every Conservative, I am trying to get every Conservative supporter to vote Conservative at this election and not be taken off course speculating about what might or might not happen after an election. I am focused 100%, as I said to you at the beginning, on winning every vote we can win at this election and to win every seat we can win.